Alicia Oglesby with Dream Home Properties.
And I'm Caitlin Odom.
Our company is located in Madison, Mississippi, and if you've been watching our summer series videos, we're super excited today. We are here with Bobby Moorehead. He is a great real estate attorney here in Ridgeland, Mississippi.
So happy to have you guys. Thanks for asking me to be on your video series. So I understand we're talking about the closing process today.
Right.
Yes.
We've been kind of going over, the purchase. We had buyers go over the purchase process, and then the contract, and then we went through mortgaging.
And then the inspection period, and now here we are at the closing table, and we will let you take it away and kind of walk us through the closing process.
Absolutely. So the closing process is the part that you get to where the title is transferred from the seller to the buyer. And that happens at closing. So it's fulfilling all those contractual obligations that are entered into in the contract phase. And it's usually the buyer having been qualified for their loan. It's the process of going through those loan documents and signing those loan documents, and then the loan being funded, and then the money being transferred from the buyer to the seller. That occurs at closing. So most sellers should understand that in a typical closing, they should be leaving the closing with a check. Hopefully all our sellers leave the closing with a check. In the rare instance where a seller has to pay money to sell their house, in that situation, the seller needs to bring in a certified check for any proceeds that they're paying in the course of the closing. All the fees and charges that the seller pays in a closing are typically itemized on a closing disclosure. So the seller can see that 24 hours before the closing. They can go over that closing disclosure with their real estate agent, and they can understand and know what they're going to see at closing, and that's going to be their check. The buyer, on the other hand, the buyer is usually working with a lender, and so the lender typically sends out that buyer's CD 3 days prior to closing. So what's a CD? A CD is a closing disclosure. The seller gets a CD, the buyer gets a CD, and all the fees and charges are totaled and subtotaled on that CD. The buyer's CD is worked on all the way up to the day of closing sometimes, but should be ready to go and in that buyer's hands 3 days prior to closing. So at closing, the buyer comes in, we review the CD, then we go through the note, the deed of trust, the other documents that a buyer needs to sign. Then we turn to the seller, and the seller signs the deed.
Okay.
And the seller signs their closing disclosure. And then if the buyer's bringing money to closing, just like with the seller, the buyer needs to bring a cashier's check, certified funds, or a wire. So at the end of the closing, we've got all the money in my escrow account. We disperse. The buyer gets a copy of the deed. The seller gets a check, and we're closed.
Oh, wow.
That's it.
You made it sound wonderful and easy.
Right. So a lot of times when buyers get to closing, they're asked if they want title insurance. So walk us through that.
Right. Title insurance is always required by the lender. A lender is going to require a lender's title insurance policy. An owner's title insurance policy is optional. The purchaser can purchase it or not. If the lender requires a lender's title insurance policy, that charge is going to be itemized on the buyer's closing disclosure. If the buyer elects to get title insurance, they can get it at a simultaneous issue rate. In other words, the lender's requiring that there be a policy issued on the lender's deed of trust, so title insurance can be offered to the buyer at a reduced price.
Okay.
If the buyer waits to buy title insurance, it costs $4 per 1,000 based on the contract sales price. If they get it simultaneously to the lender's policy, they get it at a vastly reduced amount. So it's always good if a buyer ever wants title insurance, get it at closing. Get it when the lender is requiring a policy. We've already checked the title. We've made sure that there's no issues, but title insurance also covers things that maybe are missed at closing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a problem that's not apparent at the time that we check the title. Well, title insurance steps in and covers the risk of loss due to defects in the chain of title, and is a really good insurance policy for the amount of money that's spent. I like to say it's a lot of sugar for the dime, because it covers a lot of equity. So it's a one-time premium. It covers the life of the time that you own the property. And so as your equity grows in that property, the title insurance covers that. So when you get ready to sell your home and there's a owner's title insurance policy, you won't have any trouble. You will have a policy that insures any risk of loss due to defects in the chain of title. And when you get ready to sell that home, you're not worried about any uncanceled liens from the previous owner or any gaps in the chain of title. It covers those types of risks.
Oh, okay, so it is optional, but it does sound like it's very important.
It is optional. We put it on the closing disclosure so you can see what the cost is. What we find is it used to be that a lot of people wouldn't buy it because they didn't know about the simultaneous issue price. And once Trig came along and we're putting it on the closing disclosure 3 days in advance, what we see is people saying, oh, well, that's not very much money. I'm gonna get that. So we're selling more title insurance now than what we used to sell. And one of the things I wanted to clear up also, difference between a title company and a real estate attorney.
Right, that's the other thing I was going to ask. Why is it important to pick a real estate attorney?
Obviously I'm a real estate attorney. And most of your title companies in town are all owned by real estate attorneys. So there's really not any difference in a real estate attorney closing your loan or a title company closing for you. One of the things I like to say is, do business with people that you trust. Do business with people that have been here a long time. I've seen title companies come and go, even considered opening my own title company. But I think it's more important. I like an attorney closing the loan because you not only have the attorney, you have the rules of professional conduct and responsibility that the bar puts on all of us. And you have things called IOLTA accounts, which is a special account that attorneys have to have. I think when it's a LLC, closing your loan, a title company, that it's a little bit, maybe that's a franchise. What can they do better? What can they do quicker than what my office can? I don't think anything.
Okay.
I think we have the very best fees for the very best service that you can get, and I think the marketplace develops that type of. There could be a title company with a great advertising program. Well, I think you might be paying for that, advertising. I think you're paying for the big building. You're paying for, and with a small, law firm that's closing loans, and there's a lot of good closing attorneys in this town. There's some really good people doing this. I love my competitors, so many of them. I think title company or closing attorney, not a dime's worth of fees.
Can a buyer choose who they want to close with, or are they just?
Good question. The buyer usually gets to choose. Now, the reason why I say that is when TRID came along, they said that the buyer has the opportunity to choose the vendors. The buyer has the opportunity to pick the settlement agent. The buyer can pick the home inspector. The buyer can pick who does a survey if the survey's on the contract. So the buyer gets to shop. The buyer gets to receive the benefit of the cost associated with the closing fee. What if the seller could pick an attorney that charged $3,000 for the closing? Well, that hurts the buyer, because the seller's already limited the amount that they're going to spend. They usually cap the closing costs that they're willing to contribute. And so if they have the ability to choose the attorney, then they can pick an attorney that charges unreasonably high fees. And then who does that hurt? That hurts the buyer.
Right.
Now, wonderful real estate agents like yourself would try to steer that seller away from picking an attorney that is too costly. But what if there's two agents and the seller's agent is committed to the seller picking an attorney that charges too high fees? Well, that can get in the buyer's pocketbook and it can take the buyer's money. So there's a lot of good reasons for the buyer being able to pick. Number one, the TRID says that the borrower gets to pick the settlement agent. Number two, if the seller's limited their closing costs that they're willing to contribute, and they pick an attorney that is unreasonably high, then it can hurt the buyer. So for those reasons, I think it's a good idea that at the time the contract's done, the buyer and seller agree that Robert E. Moorehead closes the loan. And I think it's just good to have that in the document so the lender doesn't get confused. The buyer's agent, sends it over here and we close it. The seller's agent is not sending it somewhere else, and there's a lot of unnecessary drama. So yeah, I would say in most of the situations, the buyer does get to pick, but I think overall, the bigger issue is it needs to be documented on the contract at the time that it's done, and so everybody knows who's going to do the closing. There are some very rare instances, and they come up actually, they're not that rare. Maybe the seller has, maybe the property's gone through an estate. Maybe the property has been partitioned, and there is an attorney that's done a lot of work on this, and they've got it pre-approved with a closing agent that can write title insurance over these little hiccups on the title. Well, then you want to use that guy or that lady.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So there's some reasons for the seller to pick, there's some reasons for the buyer to pick, but overall, yeah, get that on the contract.
Well, and it's your biggest transaction of your life. It's a very important investment, and you spend so much time looking for the right lender and looking for a good home inspector, as we talked about last week. So looking for a good closing attorney who you trust and who you know will do you a good job is just as important in your real estate transaction.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Bobby, for
Thank
having
you.
us and walking us through this
Appreciate
process.
your time. Do you want to
Absolutely.
tell them how they get in touch with you?
Well, so Robert E. Moorehead, closing attorney. I've been doing it for 20 years. It's the only thing that I do. It's what I enjoy. And you can get in touch with me, 601-956-4557 is my phone number. My office is conveniently located on Jackson Street in Ridgeland between 51 and 55. So we're very convenient for I-55, you can get off 55 and get to my office when you're going to your walkthrough or coming back and ready to close. We're easy to get to, and it's what we love doing, so we'd love to see you.
And if you have any additional questions for Bobby or for us, feel free to leave them in the comments. He'll be checking those out and he will answer all the questions that he can. And stay tuned next week for our next installment on our series.
Thank you.